You could be flinging paint up a wall or smearing gravy on your face. I don't know what I'm talking about. So this video is really about tweaking my style of drawing. Now, it's quite difficult when you have a default setting of your drawing to step outside of that. But I've been looking recently at quite a few artists who have a very different style to me, and I've been thinking about, can I incorporate some of their elements into my drawing? Now, I'm going to show you on the screen here some artists who I find particularly inspiring. Right, so now you've seen some of those artists, one of the things you may have noticed is that there's some very strong vertical line components within their art. And I was thinking about that the other day while I was doing this drawing here, where I was trying to accentuate some of the vertical components. So what I've decided to do is to try and do a drawing where I overextend the vertical lines, those components of the drawing, and to see if I can give it a little bit more of a different structure to my usual technique. So don't know whether it'll work, but we'll have a play anyway. What's the worst that can happen? It's only paper. Vanishing points will always sit on the horizon line. So once you've got your horizon line, you can actually sort of reverse engineer the picture by joining up all the horizontal lines to find the vanishing point. Now that vanishing point, which is obviously way off on the left-hand side, is the key to this drawing in a sense, because everything actually begins there and then comes out. Obviously here I'm looking at the proportion of distance above and below the phone boxes in the original drawing, and that'll give me an idea of how to actually lay this out on the page. So what I've done here is I've got my vanishing point on the far left hand side and I've put in a few guidelines. Then that's going to give me the sort of the perspective that I'm working to in this drawing, and it's sort of effectively single point perspective running to the left hand side, but there is an element of a small amount of perspective and on the right as well. But because these phone boxes aren't very deep, that'll just be sketched in. So again, what I did there in high speed was I was just looking at the proportion of the width of the overall width of the little taxi rank or police box or whatever it is to its height, and then how wide the side bit is. And you can literally do that by, you see artists holding up pencils and sticking a tongue out and squinting with one eye, and that's what that's all about. But in this case, I'm actually using a ruler, which is something I don't normally use. So what I've done is I've blocked that out in perspective to create those phone boxes. And again, I'm going in with my ruler here. One of the reasons why I'm using a ruler with a set square on the end for this is because the verticals are quite a strong component of this drawing, really, and I wanted to make sure that they were all pretty vertical, because sometimes my verticals tend to wave off in different directions, and I find it can be a little bit distracting. So this drawing, for all that it is being very roughly laid out in a technical drawing sense, you don't have to do that, by the way, you can just go and sketch it. It isn't being drawn in with a ruler, it's not being marked in technically. So what I'm basically doing is creating a very rough pencil framework, and then I'm going to put some loose pen in over the top of it, if that makes sense. So as is often the case with my drawings, what I really like is I like a sort of foreground, a middle ground, and a background, and I think those images are very appealing because you can think about line weights in quite a binary way. You can have thick, medium, and thin. So here I'm again just filling in some more of the details on the phone boxes and putting some more information in the background there. So once I've got to this point, it's actually relatively straightforward to go and start using my fountain pen just to ink things in. I have the guides from the perspective on the left-hand side, I know roughly what the perspective is going to be on the other plane, so I can just start to sketching. Now I'm looking at the structure of this little cabin and seeing where the sort of highlights are. I'm not going to be drawing every single surface, but I'm going to be looking at the form and going, you know, is that panel got a vertical split in it? You know, how many panes are within each window, aperture? But also I'm actually thinking here about a little bit about line weight as I go. Now, one of the things that you're going to be seeing here is I've already sketched in very vaguely with a sort of continuous line technique that I use a lot of the components. So basically I'm just going to be inking it in with the fountain pen. So once I've got the majority of the main components in, what I'll often do is I'll go back and just add some line weights. There is still a few bits and bobs that I've missed actually looking at this, but it doesn't matter. I'm going back in and I'm adding in a little bit of extra texture detail on like the roof tiles. That's quite important. I'm adding a slightly thicker line all the way around the outside of the main components of the foreground to try and make them pop off the background a little bit. It creates a little bit of separation between foreground and background, and that really helps pull those sort of components of the drawing towards the viewer in a way. Now, one of the interesting things I did with this video is I was using a dark grey fine liner. Now, this is a 0.5 dark grey uni pin. Hello, dog. Dogs come to say hello. And what I've done is all the bits that have been done already in black ink, they're obviously going to stay black, but everything behind that, everything, so the trees, the street furniture, the buildings are all going to be done with this grey fine liner. One of the nice things about the grey fine liner, and I think you can have sort of 2 or 3 different tones of grey, is you can pick it up and use it for one drawing. If I had to fill a fountain pen with grey ink just for one drawing, I probably couldn't be bothered, to be honest with you. Whereas I can just pick up a fine liner and I can just go at it. And the other thing is, grey fine liners are just nice to sketch with anyway. I mean, if you're doing a drawing where you want to start off with almost what feels like a pencil under sketch, you know, grey can work very well. And if it's a very contrasty watercolour you're putting over the top, it can virtually disappear. So I definitely would recommend wholeheartedly buying a grey fine liner, or maybe 2. I think you can get, you know, different widths of them. I think 0.1 and 0.5. And just experimenting. The other thing that they're quite useful for is actually if you're just doing normal sketching and you want to put some cross-hatching underneath something as a bit of shade, they can be very effective for that too. So I don't think we're really that far off this initial pen part. And then what I'll probably do is rub out all the underlying pencil lines, and then we'll get on with some painting. So I hope you found that useful. The next bit, in some ways, is probably the most interesting. And so let's crack on. Okay, so we're going to put some colour on this piece now. For this, I'm using this little Rembrandt. Now, this is sort of artist quality, really. Pretty good stuff. And I was sent this from Royal Talents to review a while ago, and I never did a specific review on it, but I really wanted to use them first. I have to say, first impressions is they're very good. They're very fresh, bright colours. I'm not sure how they compare against the sort of top-of-the-line Daniel Smith range, but that might just be a personal preference. I'm still sort of thinking about that. Anyway, I'll come back to these for a later video. So what are my plans for this? Well, my plans are to be a little bit splashy. So I want to be a little bit rough and ready with some of the colours. The background is going to remain uncoloured. I'm going to put a little bit of some splashes up through the trees. But primarily the detail is going to be on the foreground, the telephone boxes, and this little taxi shed. I think it's a taxi shed. It's somewhere in Ripon anyway. So I think big and bold rather than subtle with this. And we'll start by mixing a real postbox red. So I'm going to just splash that in there. And I wouldn't mind a little bit of that yellow in there too. I'm being quite messy with these palettes. Right, I just want that tiny bit lighter. So that's a really nice strong colour. So we're going to apply that now to these post boxes. Now there's a little bit on these post boxes. If you look at the reference drawing, there's a little bit of white that I need to leave. So I've already gone over that. And that's it. So again, I'm going to probably try and get a little bit more pigment on that. This is quite a transparent, this cadmium red is really quite transparent. So if you want to get something really punchy, you probably want to be using a couple of glazes. And also this paper, which is pink pig paper, is pretty good, but it's not what I would call top of the line watercolour paper. So it does tend to clump up the pigment a little bit. But you know what they say about workmen and toils? So I should ignore that and just carry on. Right, there we go. Now this squirrel brush, like all squirrel brushes, you can actually be very detailed if you manage to get a point on it. But it holds a huge amount of paint as well, a huge amount of pigment. So that's a layer of red there. I'm not massively happy with the application of that. I think what I would probably do is just add a bit more pigment, because it's not a very nice application. I'd rather it was scruffier than. There we go. And I'm gonna splash a little bit of red just about the place, a tiny bit. There we go. So there's a lot of white on here, but this white I'm going to put back in with a white fine liner, so I don't necessarily need to be too precious with this. I want to leave the white at the top, and I want to leave this bit of white here. I have to say straight away, this brush has got a beautifully sharp point, but they often do when they're new. Don't always stay like that, particularly if you're not very careful about how you store them. I would say the more delicate the point on the brush, the more care you have to take in making sure you store it sitting in a way that keeps that tip nice and straight. Because if it dries out splayed or to one side, sometimes that can be it for that brush. And I know I've said previously that I might have made a bit of an error there, it doesn't matter. You can straighten them with soap and various conditioner and all sorts, but it doesn't always work. Right, so I think apart from these panels at the bottom, there's 3 panels on this side and 3 panels on that side, and then there's a black layer. Underneath. And the same here. So I'm just going to drag that all the way across and do the same on the bottom. And then I can just colour these bits in. Now these panels on the side have a halfway band on them. There. The ones on this side don't, even though it looks like I've probably drawn them all. Doesn't matter. Okay, so I'm going to just mix up a tiny bit more of the dark. Now I'm going to go over this again with another glaze because I want to try and show some of this shadow detail. But I just want to make sure I've got sufficient on there. Right. So that's fine for that one. So I've not mixed that up too much so that we get a little bit of pigment coming through, and I'm just going to block that in. Thus, let's take some more of that, and there is some shadow detail under here. Now, one of the things that I often think with these kind of pictures is that if you go back and you do too many layers, or you fiddle too much, it can lose some of the freshness. So I like to keep it quite impulsive, if you know what I mean, and don't do too much. So there will be a couple of dries and layers in something like this, but I really do purposely try sometimes to just to blooming leave it alone, if you know what I mean. So there's a sign here. There's some other elements here, like some of this street furniture. Don't know whether to draw the trees or the tree trunks. Right, so I think I'm going to hairdry it at that. I've got some of this red mix. I don't quite like the way it's granulated in the palette, I'll be honest with you. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of this burnt sienna, I think it is, here. Sorry, that's the burnt sienna, and then a little bit of ultramarine to make a dark browny red. Maybe add a little bit more red in that. Okay, so we've got ourselves a shadow colour, we've got a sharp brush. So let's go and just put one layer in. I am only going to do one layer. I'm not going to put any more layers of shadow in, otherwise it's going to kill it. Now the sun is coming from this top left corner, as you can see from the shadow on the across the foam box, which I didn't do right the first time. Well, I didn't replicate what was in the picture. Obviously, there's no right. It's just what you're doing. It's really difficult, even when I'm doing these things, to get out of the habit of talking about things that don't go according to plan as being mistakes. But I do genuinely feel really strongly that the fact that I'm checking it means that I'm kind of not doing too bad, if you know what I mean. I don't like to phrase any of these things as sort of, you know, the old Bob Ross happy little accident. I just don't see the point in, when you're doing a piece of art like this, getting to the point where you do something that you think, oh, that wasn't great, and then it spoils it for you, because you might only be like a fifth of the way through the drawing, and if you're having a great time, what does it matter? So here, I'm trying to do some straight lines. Just trying to get a little bit of this shadow detail in. Now this side of the foam box, of course, is well in shadow. There, you can see through the window there, but I probably won't put that detail in. I don't think there's any need. So as a shadow colour here, this is, as I said, a very dark red with a bit of brown, a little bit of blue. And then there's a shadow down this element of this recessed panel, and then across the top there, and that helps to describe the form. Shadow along there, and then across the top here. But there's actually a lot of this is actually in shadow from so if I get a nice wet brush and I can keep a wet line as I bring that down there. As I've said before about this paper, it's not great in keeping a wet edge. And I don't know whether that is what characteristics of the paper, but it's not very thick. Don't get me wrong, I like this paper. I think it's actually very strong for like quick artwork, and it's the pink pads are all excellent value.
I've got my trusty gel pen here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and just reinstate these frames around the windows. Now these ones, there is a line that goes down the middle, but actually thinking about it, you wouldn't see that white one there necessarily. So we can leave that out, and that helps to tell the story. Put it in for that one. So it's pretty roughly done. It looks fine. Now these ones are going to be slightly darker. Oops, we've got another one there we've forgotten about. And you see that window isn't quite right compared to those ones, but again, you can lose sleep over that. I ain't gonna. So we'll sketch these in a little bit. Let's be a bit looser with these. Again, I don't necessarily want to be that fussy about it. And we've got various highlights in these little parts of the foam box. Again, I'm not going to be too precious. Right, so I might leave it at that because I wanted it to be quite loose. I wanted it to be a little bit of an experiment. So yeah, it's really interesting. Let's have a close-up at a few of the details. There's the little taxi. And there's the foam boxes, and that tree's particularly nice. I like that. Some of the background, and then there's other trees, and yeah. So yeah, I think it's pretty good. I think it's been an interesting experiment. What's surprised me about it really is some of these vertical lines haven't come out quite as strong as I thought they would have done. It obviously, you can do a lot more density of line work and it'll still read as basic shapes and things like that. So that's something I've really learned from this. I tell you what, I've loved doing it. It's been really fun sketch. I think it's been quite challenging in terms of deciding where to stop colour. But often that's the case, and the only way you learn is by playing and seeing what you enjoy and what you like. So I hope you enjoyed that process. I'm not sure whether it worked, I'll be honest. But then again, what does worked, angry rabbits, what does worked mean? I enjoyed it, so that's the most important thing, isn't it? I think it's got a little bit more energy than some of my more precise and considered line work, and I quite like that. It's nice just to mix it up, isn't it? It's all just about enjoying the process. The end result is great, but it's just a step on the journey. Look at different artists who have different style to you. Try sort of incorporating elements of that into your art and just have a play and just see what happens. That's the great thing about art, is we all speak very individual languages, and it's really good to try and understand and really listen to other people's art language and try and incorporate some of that maybe into your language, and it could change and it could mold you. I think one of the things that we fail to appreciate wholeheartedly most of the time about our own language is just how unique that is. And it doesn't matter what your style is. You could be flinging paint up a wall or smearing gravy on your face. I don't know what I'm talking about. But definitely, if there's people you admire, if there's people who really like the style, take their work, sort of distill it and have a little bit of a play. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.